toxic sister crashed my wedding, claimed my babies were illegitimate, and ended up in trouble with the police. You won't believe what happened next. I, 24F, got married about a week ago, and unfortunately, things went quite haywire. Let me start right from the beginning. I have an older sister. Let's call her Stacy, 26F, and we have always had intense sibling rivalry. And I'm serious about it. We hated each other growing up because all we wanted to do was one-up each other. We never got along, and even as we grew older, we continued to loathe each other. We made sure to never outwardly show people how much we disliked each other, but it was always there under the surface. Stacy and I didn't talk to each other when we were living together, and would only put on a show for our family members whenever they were around. Even our parents knew that we didn't like each other, and they never even tried to fix things between us. I guess, in a way, that's what led to a lot of things going wrong eventually, but I'll come to that later. Stacy moved out when she was 18 for college, and I was really relieved because that meant I could finally be myself around the house instead of constantly walking on eggshells because of her. She would only come back for the holidays and brag about how great her life was since she was attending one of the best business schools in the state. I was a little jealous, but my priority was to work harder than her and get into a better school, which I eventually did. I got into an Ivy League school, and that was a pretty huge slap in her face. My success was celebrated in a much bigger way than hers. I thought getting into an Ivy League school would end our competition, but it didn't. One day, Stacy announced that she was starting her own business. With some help from my dad, she actually did it. I don't know if it was luck or hard work, but it took off a couple of years ago. She even moved to Japan to expand the technology aspect of her business. It was a grand success, and our parents were incredibly proud of her. That was 2 years ago. Since then, she's been living in Japan. Meanwhile, things weren't going so well for me after I graduated. Stacy's accomplishments only added salt to the wound. I had found a job, but it wasn't glamorous or satisfying, so I quit soon after starting. That turned out to be a huge mistake. Looking back, I should have stayed and worked my way up. Instead, I was being foolish and competing with my sister when I should have been focusing on myself and my career. After quitting, I went through a phase of waiting for something to just fall into my lap. When nothing did, I started getting depressed. Stacy's success made it worse because my parents constantly bragged about her. I hated it, but I couldn't say anything without sounding bitter or jealous. I had to hide my feelings whenever I was around my family and pretend to be happy for her. Anything less than happiness wasn't acceptable, even though I felt bitter and jealous. That was when I met my husband, Jackson, 25M, and everything changed for the better. Meeting him practically turned my life around. At the time, it had been about 6 months since I quit my job, and I was still waiting for a better opportunity that wasn't coming. I was depressed, frustrated, and struggling to cover rent and buy necessities. I had to rely on my parents for money, which was humiliating, and the disappointment in their voices every time I asked for help was like a dagger to my heart. To distract myself from how miserable I was, I downloaded a dating app. I wasn't looking for anything serious. I just wanted to hook up and use it as a temporary escape. I went on a few casual dates with men who weren't looking for anything serious either. It wasn't fulfilling, but it helped me forget about my problems for a while. Then I matched with Jackson and everything changed. He was funny, charming, and just the right amount of masculine. He ticked all my boxes. We started talking, and after 2 weeks, he asked me out. He made it clear that he wasn't interested in casual relationships. He was dating to marry. I admired his honesty and decided to give it a shot. Our first date went incredibly well. It felt like I had known him forever. For the first time, I wasn't trying to impress someone or prove something. It was refreshing. We had an easy, natural conversation and instantly clicked. I realized that I wanted to see where this relationship could go. After a few more dates, I found out I was pregnant. We had been together for only 3 months, and I was terrified of how Jackson would react. I wanted to keep the baby. It just felt right, even though the timing was less than ideal. When I told Jackson, he was incredibly supportive. He said it was my body and my choice, and he would stand by me no matter what. When I told him I wanted to keep the baby, he was overjoyed. We agreed not to rush into marriage just because of the pregnancy. Instead, we decided to take things slow and focus on getting to know each other better. Shortly after, we found out we were having twins. It was overwhelming but exciting. Jackson moved in with me, and I introduced him to my parents. I was nervous because I knew they might not approve of my life choices, but they surprised me by being supportive. They even threw me a party to celebrate the pregnancy. They told me they were proud of me and loved me unconditionally. It was a relief to have their support, especially after feeling like I was constantly letting them down. However, Stacy didn't share their enthusiasm. She began sending me backhanded compliments and snide remarks in the family group chat. She acted like my pregnancy was some sort of failure. She couldn't pass up an opportunity to remind me that I was unmarried and not as successful as she was. It was exhausting, but I endured it for the sake of my parents, who were trying to mend our relationship. Despite my best efforts, Stacy's attitude only worsened. When she returned home for Christmas that year, she was insufferable. She bragged endlessly about her successes, shot me disdainful looks, and made underhanded comments about my pregnancy. At one point, she sarcastically asked if I was even happy for her, as if I was supposed to be celebrating her achievements while she demeaned mine. That Christmas party was the final straw for me. I left early to avoid an emotional meltdown and decided to cut ties with her. My parents agreed it was for the best, and I exited the family group chat shortly after. For the next 2 years, Stacy and I had no contact. I didn't know much about her life, except for occasional updates from relatives. For weeks before my wedding, I heard from family members that Stacy was back from Japan with a baby. She claimed it was a miracle baby and had been born just 2 months prior. She also revealed she had gotten married in a private ceremony the year before. The timing was suspicious, as it coincided with my wedding plans, but I brushed it off. I had no intention of letting her antics ruin my special day. Unfortunately, Stacy had other plans. On my wedding day, after the ceremony was over, I spotted her among the guests. She had crashed the wedding uninvited. My blood boiled, but Jackson and my parents calmed me down. They reminded me that causing a scene would only give her the attention she craved. Throughout the reception, Stacy made her presence known by going around and socializing. However, she wasn't just mingling, she was actively spreading malicious comments about me. She told guests that my children were illegitimate because they were born before marriage, implying they didn't count. Her words were hurtful, and several guests came to me afterward to share what she had said. I held my composure and refrained from confronting her, determined not to let her ruin my wedding. But then, chaos erupted. Out of nowhere, police officers arrived at the venue and sealed the exits. Everyone was confused, and the atmosphere became tense. Within minutes, Stacy was being arrested. She was screaming, crying, and holding the baby she had been showing off as hers. Another woman was present, hysterically shouting that the baby was hers. It turned out Stacy's miracle baby wasn't hers at all. The photos she had shown us were taken from a friend's social media account, and she had photoshopped herself into them. She had been babysitting for this friend and, on the day of my wedding, had taken the baby without permission while the parents were asleep. When the friend couldn't reach Stacy and realized the baby was missing, she called the police. The friend had overheard Stacy talking about crashing my wedding, which led the police to the venue. Stacy was arrested for her actions, and the baby was safely returned to the parents. The entire situation was surreal, and my family and I were left reeling. Stacy's behavior had gone from competitive to outright psychotic. In the days that followed, Stacy's actions became the talk of the family. My parents were in disbelief, struggling to reconcile with the fact that their daughter had resorted to such extreme and disturbing measures. Stacy, however, remained unapologetic. She began blaming me for her behavior, claiming I had driven her to it by flaunting my marriage and children. She even reached out to me, demanding I convince her friends not to press charges. She wanted me to vouch for her, saying I had been tormenting her and that her actions were a result of emotional distress. I refused. I told her that she deserved whatever consequences came her way. I also made it clear that I wanted nothing more to do with her. My parents, however, were torn. They felt responsible for the rivalry they had fostered between us as children and believed I should help Stacy avoid jail time. They asked me to speak to her friends and persuade them to drop the charges. I was appalled. Stacy had stolen a child, lied about it, and crashed my wedding. Yet my parents wanted me to protect her from the repercussions of her actions. I made the difficult decision to cut ties with my family entirely. While my parents had been supportive during my pregnancy and after the birth of my twins, Their insistence on defending Stacy was too much for me to handle. I needed to prioritize my mental health and my new family, Jackson and my children. Shortly after, I heard from relatives that Stacy's friends had decided to press charges. She was now facing potential jail time. Her claims of having consent to take the baby didn't hold up, especially given her behavior at the wedding. The court case was pending, but things were looking grim for her. 2 months later, Stacy was officially on trial and facing up to 5 years in prison. Her lawyers argued for leniency, citing her mental instability, but the case against her was strong. Meanwhile, Jackson and I focused on moving forward. We went on our honeymoon, leaving our children with his parents, and finally had the peaceful, joyous time we had hoped for on our wedding day. As for my parents, I haven't spoken to them since the wedding. I've made it clear that I won't reconcile with them unless they acknowledge that I was right to stand my ground. They need to take responsibility for the damage they caused by fostering the toxic environment that led to this mess. Until then, I'm choosing to focus on my happiness and the life I've built with Jackson. Looking back, I never imagined my sister would take things to such an unhinged level. Her actions were shocking, but they also served as a wake-up call. I realized that cutting ties with toxic people, even family, is sometimes necessary for your own well-being. I'm grateful for the love and support of my husband and children, and I'm determined to create a healthy, loving environment for my family, something I never had growing up. Thank you for reading my story. To anyone dealing with similar struggles, remember, you don't owe anyone your peace. Sometimes, walking away is the best thing you can do.